Good morning. Thank you guys for coming back again today. For those who are watching online, this is our second day of our social media seminar called Analog Faith in Digital Babylon. This morning we'll have two sessions. The first one is Holy Sexuality in Digital Babylon, covering topics like pornography and other lustful content and how that is obviously damaging as Christians, but really as Christians, how we can be prepared to engage in this as a conversation with our church and to educate our young people around the growing landscape that this presents in technology. Let's begin with a prayer, and then I'll turn it over to Jason Helton. Father God, thank you so much for today and for the blessings that you give to us. We are thankful for the time that we've had already this weekend to discuss these concepts of generations and technology and how we as a church can work together to grow and combat these new struggles that we have and maybe use the new tools that we have as well to further your kingdom. This morning, this can be a difficult conversation and one that churches sometimes don't have as frequently as we need to. I pray for openness and honesty, a willingness to be vulnerable and accountable as we discuss some of the temptations and harmful ways that we can use technology, that we can tackle these topics head on and learn how to teach around them to our congregations as much as we can. We love you so much, and we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Get the pew on that one. In Scripture, I think we see two types of sexuality. Any thoughts on what those two types of sexuality are?
Good and bad.
Good and bad. All right. Anybody else? Get some folks that agree. Physical and mental. Okay, I've not had that answer before. The two that I see are holy and unholy. I think what we see is sexuality that God describes, prescribes, and created. And I think we see everything else outside of that. And I think this might be a way for us to engage in better conversations, particularly with our teenagers and emerging generations, but just in general. In my lifetime, the church has put a big emphasis on sexuality and sexual purity specifically, and has done so in some ways that I think have not always been successful as far as the younger folks understanding, like fully getting an understanding. So I want to get into a little bit more of that today. We like to say that all sin is the same, and in the eyes of God, the effects of separating us from God, I would definitely agree with that. But Scripture seems to indicate that sexual sin is in fact different. Jesus said in Matthew chapter 5, "You have heard that it was said, 'You shall not commit adultery.' But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart." Jesus is very clear in saying that it's not specifically the action where it begins, it's the heart where sin takes place. Sin is a heart issue. In the context here of Matthew 5, this is a part of the Sermon on the Mount. And I think there's a pattern of Jesus' teaching here where he says, "You have heard that it was said." You know what the law says. You know the tangible elements of the law. But I'm trying to point you to what the law was actually trying to point you to the whole time. You focused on the fact that you could have a certificate of divorce. I'm telling you, don't even look at a woman with lust in your heart. He parses out here the intention and where God resides. God wants the heart. And I think when we teach about sexual purity in particular, we oftentimes spend a lot of energy talking about don't do this action. Well, when I'm told don't get cookies out of the cookie jar, the only thing I'm thinking about is trying to get cookies out of the cookie jar, right? When we really, really focus exclusively on the action, we don't leave room for context of why sex is holy in the beginning, in the first place. We don't give any context as to the heart and the intimacy that happens. I think the world has taken particularly the act of sex, and they've created this term called making love, which is it's not really accurate. And I don't think even the word sex is the best word for us to use. It's intimacy. It's marital intimacy, sexual intimacy. And we're going to really kind of figure out the whole details of that today from a neurological standpoint as well as a biblical. But I want us to spend time here in these passages to get the full breadth of what God expects about sexuality. In 1 Corinthians 6, Paul's writing to Corinth. And Corinth, think in terms of a modern-day Corinth, I think New Orleans is probably a pretty good analogy there. New Orleans is a port city, just like Corinth was. lots known for sexual immorality, lots of temple worship in sexual context. Think of Mardi Gras, kind of the same thing, right? Very sexually known city. And he's writing to Christians that live there. He says, flee from sexual immorality. Every other sin a person commits is outside the body, but sexual sin is different. He says, the sexually immoral person sins against his own body. Or do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit within you, whom you have from God? You are not your own, for you were bought with a price. So glorify God in your body. Sex is something that has been effectively manipulated from the beginning of time, essentially. We call it the oldest occupation, right? Is harlotry, someone that can worker of the night. Paul is talking to a group of people that are faithful Christians and trying to live faithfully in a town that is known for sexual promiscuity. And also in this congregation, this group of people, this town he's writing to, in chapter 5, we referenced it yesterday, there's a man who has a sexual relationship with his mother or his stepmother, his father's wife. And the church is totally okay with it because they're not doing anything about it. They just ignore it. And I think that kind of happens a lot too in our congregations, where when it comes to a big sin, adultery, we definitely put that one, we shine a light on that. When it comes to same-sex attraction, when it comes to homosexuality, we put that one on its own pedestal of anger and hatred and vitriol. But sexual sin is the same as sin. It is a sin. And when we act on and we cultivate those impure, unholy desires, whether it's same-sex or heterosexual desires, we do that in an unholy context, we're violating what God has planned for us, what God has designed for us. And I think there's a different approach here that we can see. Paul says further in Colossians 3 that put to death, therefore, what is earthly in you, sexual immorality, impurity, passion, evil desire, and covetousness, which is idolatry. These are the things that we died to when we became a Christian, when we decided we want to have life in Christ. We're putting away these things. But what technology has done so effectively is it allows us to cultivate all of these things 24/7. Whether it's social media or other platforms on your phone, on your computer, or just media. I think one of the most successful things that Satan has done over the last 50 years is he's taken entertainment and put that in the center of family life. Most likely, most of us here, when we go home, the most prominent piece of furniture in our living room is the television. Everything kind of centers around that. The everyday life now is determined by what entertainment we access. We spend a lot of money on our internet access so that we can have access to all the streaming, all these things. Satan has convinced us that entertainment is sort of the central hub of life, and that's just not the case. That doesn't leave a lot of room for work. Speaking of entertainment, it's very powerful. In the mid-90s, there were 2 sitcoms that were at their height and their peak of their influence in our culture and popularity. And one of those was Friends. And there's a particular episode of Friends where Joey and Chandler here, they got access to a pornography channel. And this is back when you had cable. Cable was the only way we really watched television. And you had to pay to get this particular channel, but for whatever reason, in that episode, they got access to it free. And the entire episode is this situation. So everything they do is to try to keep that channel. They don't sleep. They don't go to work. They don't let people really come in and out. Everything they're doing is just trying to keep that channel. We can't mess this up. And it put at the center of now one of the most influential sitcoms, it put pornography and the pursuit of pornography front and center. And it made it funny. It made it okay. But even before this episode, there was an episode, and this kills me because I'm a big Seinfeld fan. The 4 people you see here, the 4 friends, today, the #1 rated episode of Seinfeld on IMDb, the internet database for movie database. #1 rated episode is, I think it's called The Wager or the Bet. And they make a bet to see who can go the longest without masturbating. This is 92 or 93 when this topic became culturally okay. When Satan takes sin and he puts it in the context of a sitcom and he makes us laugh at it, we take our guard down. We don't see it as something that separates us from God. We don't see the reality of it. It becomes very consumable. It's palatable. It's taking something that tastes really sour and just putting a little water on that and making it tolerable, right? It's little by little. So if he's taken entertainment, successfully put entertainment at the center of family life, and now in that entertainment, he's put these teachings of culture through comedy and sitcoms, well, now he is engaged in our hearts deeply. He's very good at what he does. And all the while, we're concerned about our kids going out and finding trouble there when we have put it front and center and said, hey, this is funny, this is what we laugh at. And all the while, our friends and our roommates are the ones that are actually unraveling what God has tried to put together for us. So this is another example in my mind of how this is not a young people problem, this is an all of us problem. How we view the life we live is very important. We don't have to live in an Amish community, but we have more control over our lives than we realize. And the things that we put in our lives oftentimes are not good for us spiritually, but they're fun, or they're enjoyable, or they're easy. Think about back to Exodus 14 when Israel's standing there and they're looking at the Red Sea and they see the Egyptians. If we just went back and died in Egypt, that would have been better to die in slavery. That's a horrible thing to say. I can only think that their rationale there was that was at least familiar. You know, it's the girl that's dating a guy that's terrible for her, and all her friends say, hey, you should really break up, or vice versa, I guess. You know, you should break up with this person. But like, yeah, I know it's not good, but I don't want to be alone. At least it's familiar, right? Sometimes sin just gets so familiar and so comfortable that just breaking up with it, we don't want to do because it's all we've known. And that's what sin does. It gets us in these cycles. This is a breakdown. We referenced part of this the other day, yesterday as well, of when I did this survey at Madison. I've begun doing this different places. So looking at the results from, did that go 2 slides? Yes, it did. Here at Fishinger, based off of the results that we had here, total 47% of people that took this survey had a conversation with their parents growing up about sex, which means that 53% did not. More than half did not have a conversation growing up. If you break that down according to generation, 33% of boomers, 33% of Gen X did have a conversation. 80% of millennials had a conversation. This is interesting because it shows what I've seen now with over 600 of these, that the younger we get, the more conversations are taking place. But it's not overly encouraging. Gen Z, I think there was only one on that, and so that's why that's a 0%. It's just, I wouldn't necessarily put a lot of stock in that. But this is a bigger sample size. I've had right around 20 members of the silent generation take an online survey. I think that's just a win right there, just that by itself. They picked up a phone or someone near them used their phone and they took it. But 7% of members of the, these are all members of the church. These are only done in congregations. 7% of the silent generation had a conversation. That ticks up quite a bit when you get to the boomers, 35%. That goes up 2% when you get to Gen X. Millennials, a little under half. Gen Z, a little over half. But if we look at these numbers, the best we have is the youngest generation, where barely half of them had a conversation. And you guys saw the survey. It's generic. Did you have a conversation about sex or sexuality? So that could even just be one time it was mentioned. Those are not good numbers. And then we look up and we say, well, why in the world are our marriages failing? Why in the world do we have a pornography crisis? The porn pandemic's been around a lot longer than COVID has ever been around. Why do we look up and say, well, why are our girls struggling with self-image and body image? And why is everybody's all sex crazed? Well, we didn't get any guidance. We don't talk about it. When we don't talk about it, it doesn't go away. It just never gets put in the context of God. So some of this are self-inflicted wounds, from my estimation. Some of these things are preventable, or at least we have to try. But when we don't talk about it, we're not even trying. And I think we have a God-given responsibility, particularly as parents, but also as the older generations in our churches, to model what we're supposed to talk about. The heart of all this is that sex is more than an act. It is a vital part of an intimate and a holy relationship. Growing up, I heard a lot of different approaches to the talk. And that's another thing. It's not the talk. It's not a one-time conversation. What you understand as a 7-year-old should be vastly different than what you understand as a 12-year-old, as a 17-year-old, and a 20-year-old. Your questions should change, right? But if we have one talk one time when they're 10, and then we say, all right, that's all you need. No. You're going to take that 10-year-old and say everything you've learned in school is all you need? Go ahead and go get a job. Like, that's just not how it works. That doesn't equip them. It's an ongoing conversation. That goes back to one thing we mentioned last night of we are trying to cultivate a culture of conversation in our churches, but also in our homes. And really, really driving home the fact that it's more than just an act. Don't focus solely on the act of having sex outside of marriage. Focus on the whole picture. And that's what I want to do this morning. I want to try to give a framework that I think is a little bit better approach, more effective, and just more accurate. Oxytocin and vasopressin are two words that I never heard in a Bible class, and I actually never heard in a biology class in high school or college. Or if I did, it didn't stick. I don't remember it at all. I don't think it was mentioned. Oxytocin and vasopressin are two hormones that are found both in the male and female brain. And they are the two hormones that become most active in moments of intimacy. If you hug someone for 20 seconds or more, oxytocin will be released in your brain. If you have a kiss for 6 seconds or longer, oxytocin will release in your brain, and particularly in the female brain. These are referred to as the bonding hormones. So fellas, you're welcome. Here's your homework. 6-second kiss with your wife. That bonds you to that person. When we talk about sex, oftentimes, Elaine and I were talking about this yesterday. When we were growing up, a popular analogy was take a rose, pass it around the room, gets back to the speaker, it's all beat up, the petals are gone, or every time you give yourself, girls, to a man sexually, you lose a petal on that rose. Well, eventually a rose runs out of petals. There's a finite number of petals there. And so then you're left with something that's just discarded. That's horrific, just to be quite honest, to say you're no longer redeemable. If you have sex with a certain number of people, now there's no place for you. God, well, who does God want? God wants the broken roses. It's a terrible imagery. And I don't guess we knew any better, or we just didn't think about it. But two things that stick out to me with that. One, it's just wrong. It's absolutely a wrong teaching. And two, it seemed to put all of the pressure for sexual purity squarely on the shoulders of our ladies. And that's unacceptable. Also wrong. It's a false teaching, I would say. It's a wrong teaching for sure. Completely misses the mark. When we talk about oxytocin and vasopressin, especially when you're talking with your kids, and even if your kids are in college or grown, have these conversations. Think of a piece of tape. I think that's a lot more accurate of what actually happens. If I put a piece of tape on the cover of my Bible here and I press firmly, what's going to happen? It's going to be a strong bond, right? It's going to stick. It's going to be firm. What happens if I try to remove that piece of tape? It's going to be difficult, and there's probably going to be some damage there, right? And what happens if I try to reuse that piece of tape? Each time I try to reuse the piece of tape, it loses its ability to bond deeply. In the science community, we refer to these two hormones as the bonding hormones. Not in church, the science community. They acknowledge that these hormones bond you to someone when you engage in intimacy, even holding hands. God designed us to create strong bonds in our marriage, and he used sex to be the most vulnerable part of that. The reason sex is most often weaponized in a relationship, even in a good marriage, is because it involves complete vulnerability and transparency. They say that public speaking is the greatest fear of most people. I would say being naked in front of anyone is the greatest fear in my world. That's a very vulnerable place to be. Well, when you engage in sex, you're naked. You say, I am willing to be vulnerable in your presence, and I'm willing to give myself to you. And if you're doing the same thing, when two people are vulnerable together, they bond, and they bond deeply and strongly. Not only that, what is more Christ-like than giving of self? Nothing. So here we have sexual intimacy. It builds intimacy. It builds strong bonds with someone. And sexual intimacy also has a holy aspect to it. When we say don't have sex outside of marriage, we don't ever glance at the holiness of it. We don't give any context for our kids to understand that God has a purpose for this. Go back to holding hands as a kid. The first time you held a girl's hand or a guy's hand like that, all the butterfly feelings. Well, sex is that to this whole exponential degree. You have to be very vulnerable, and we don't do vulnerability very well. When these two, and the male brain vasopressin is a little bit more prevalent, and it heightens your olfactory senses. So when the first intimate encounter you have, if she's wearing a certain perfume, that actually maps in your brain. These hormones map your brain in these moments. And so you were wired to someone. So when the Bible says to become one, I always kind of picture that as like the puzzle pieces fitting together. But it's more than that. You were actually wired hormonally to this person. You were bonded to them and on a neurological level. So when you have all of these repeated intimate encounters where you trigger this reward circuitry for intimacy with pornography, now you're training your brain to bond with pixels on a screen. Like at its base level, it's just pixels. It's not even people, right? Or other side of that is with strangers. You're bonding with strangers based off of their sexual intimacy. You're also becoming a consumer of sexual pleasure. And we're going to see in Scripture that's not what the Bible teaches at all. Technology amplifies what's in our hearts. And so what our brains are connected to our hearts. So what we're putting in there, remember Jesus said the eye is the lamp of the body. So what we fill our minds with directly has a direct connection to our hearts. Our culture is set on sexual immorality in so many ways because it uses sex in a whole lot of different ways. I had a conversation with a friend of mine, this is probably a year ago now, and we were talking about emerging generations, and I just asked him, what does he think that their greatest struggle is? He said, well, they can't do stuff. They can't fix things, build things, all that. I think that's their greatest challenge or whatever. And it was a little bit ironic because after lunch, he was actually headed over to my house to fix some stuff. So he had a point, but I said, I think it's the sexual stuff. And he's like, no, I mean, we had Playboy magazine, Penthouse, and all that. And that's when it kind of clicked. Like, he doesn't get it. It's different now. When you look at an image, so in those magazines, they were photographs of naked people. To my knowledge, generally not engaging in actual sexual acts. If I hold up my phone and you see a picture on my phone while we're driving down the road, you'll remember, okay, well, there's a picture of whatever. Jason was wearing a blue shirt. Got it, okay. If I hold up my phone and there's a video, you're doing this back and forth. Our brains crave novelty. We get a dopamine hit when something novel happens. And the reason video is exponentially more addictive than still images is because video gives you a scene, but then you also know something else is coming, but you don't know what it is. So it builds anticipation. Think about it this way. The same technology goes into your phone. If you're going to refresh your phone, what do you do to refresh it? If I want to refresh this page, I put my finger on it, and I pull it down and I let it go, right? Well, what else does that mimic? Pulling down and letting go, and then receiving a reward. Slot machines. There's no coincidence. That's by design. Slot machine philosophy and theory works. When you pull down the lever on a slot machine, you get one number, and then another number, and another number. Why wouldn't they just give you all the numbers right there together? Because it builds anticipation. Video in particular is exponentially more addictive because it builds this anticipation. It's filled with novelty. Anybody ever been on YouTube before? Hope so, most likely. So YouTube is a tube site. And when you pull up on a tube site, you pull up a video that you're watching, what's usually right there on the right side column? What's that? More suggested videos or recommended videos, right? And what happens if you click on one of those videos? What comes up on the right side? What happens if you click on that one? It's all more, right? Remember that infinite scroll we talked about yesterday? There's an infinite bank of novelty. And YouTube, on the whole, can be harmless, right? You can learn a lot on YouTube. But you can also go down a rabbit hole and look up 3 hours later and realize, how in the world did I end up here? So when tube sites came on, well, even before that, when we went from dial-up internet to high-speed internet, the pornography world changed. When I was in high school, or junior high and high school, Napster and LimeWire were file-sharing platforms that you could download things, mostly illegally. And I downloaded a lot of Dave Matthews in those days. But a lot of my friends also, I realized later, because they had faster internet, they also downloaded movies. And at that time, Girls Gone Wild was very popular. And so guys were downloading pornography as well. Well, now we fast forward and we get to high-speed internet, where now it's just 5G, 4G and 5G everywhere. With the click and the slide of a button, it's really the click of a screen, you have access to more pornographic content than your grandparents had in 3 lifetimes. In 10 minutes, a person can consume more pornographic imagery. So what happened, and we'll get into this, a little more literature here in a minute, it's different. So when we say that, yeah, we had that sexual sin has been around from the beginning, that's why Scripture is still relevant today, right? It proves its relevance every single generation. But what's changed is the access and the amount of access that our young people in particular have, that we all have access to now. Lustful content, it's everywhere. It's not just pornography, but the pornography game is different. Listen to this excerpt. This is from Gary Wilson's book, Your Brain on Porn. Porn poses unique risk beyond supernormal stimulation. First, it's easy to access. It's available 24/7, free, and private. That's very different from when you grew up and you had to find somebody who had access to a magazine. Got it under their uncle's bed or whatever. I remember 5th grade, a fellow named Justin brought a Penthouse magazine to school. We didn't know what we were looking at. We giggled and felt funny, right? Like that was, but there was a finite number of images. Even if you went through that magazine, it would be weeks before you get access to another magazine. Well, now it's available 24/7. It's always in your pocket. It's free. You don't have to pay for it, and it's private. Second, most users start watching porn by puberty. Their brains are at their peak of dopamine sensitivity, plasticity, and vulnerability to addiction and inadvertent rewiring of sexual taste. Anybody ever been around an adolescent that just like immediately latches on to something? They're obsessive, and then they move immediately to the next thing. They just obsess about that. Their brains are at their peak vulnerability for addiction. And we put in their hands access to these things, or they find somehow access to these things. Finally, there are limits to food consumption. He contrasts binging on food and binging on pornography. In contrast, there are no physical limits on internet porn consumption other than the need to take bathroom and food breaks. Binging on porn feels like a promise of pleasure, but recall that the message of dopamine isn't satisfaction, it's keep going. Satisfaction is just around the corner. So what's interesting here that I learned in this study is that dopamine is not necessarily the thing that addicts you with pleasure. Dopamine promises pleasure, and then delta phos B and some other hormones and chemicals produce that pleasure of like, oh, that was good, let's remember that. Dopamine keeps telling you that pleasure is just around the corner, which is why dopamine helps cause so much deep addiction, because what's just around the corner last time, well, that same amount of dopamine is no longer as potent as it once was, so I need more dopamine, so I've got to go beyond. And now if you're on these porn sites and these tube sites that offer more and more novelty, you were confined to the magazine, and what was in the magazine was what you had. Well, now, with a couple of accidental clicks, you find yourself in the most grotesque, violent, horrible things that the internet has to offer. Easily, and sometimes accidentally. Sexual sin is different. From the same book, the highly malleable adolescent brain wires to sexual cues in the environment. Adolescents wire together experiences and arousal much faster and more easily than young adults will just a few years later. Teens are especially vulnerable because their reward circuitry is in overdrive. One study I read suggested that not just the content, but if you go to the same computer or the same phone to get your sexual, and you're addicted to pornography in particular, the actual device that you access that becomes a trigger. Remember Pavlov's dogs, whenever he'd ring the bell, they would start to salivate. So when you see that phone or that computer, because there's such a habit there associated with it, your brain automatically goes into that way. It's kind of like when you're driving and you start driving home without thinking about it and don't realize it, your brain's on autopilot. Well, your brain now, you have trained autopilot to say, hey, this is what we do with this. Adolescent brains wire together experiences and arousal much faster and more easily than young adults. So a child that is exposed to pornography and harmful, lustful content at the age of 8 is more susceptible than at the age of 18 because their brains are in different places. Remember, the prefrontal cortex of our brain, it seems like a cruel joke, but the part of our brain that's responsible for good judgment, for decision-making, for thinking through consequences, doesn't fully develop until our mid-20s. It's a long time after the average person now encounters adult content. In response to internet novelty, their brains produce higher spikes of dopamine but become bored more easily. This is the process we were just talking about. Their brains are also more sensitive to dopamine and produce more delta phos B, and that's the remember and repeat hormone. The adolescent brain's oversensitivity to reward also means its owner is more vulnerable to addiction. This is important because they don't necessarily, well, I'll get to that slide in just a second. A 2014 Cambridge study shows that neurochemical reality primes young brains, urging them to define sex according to what offers the biggest sexual buzz. This is it. A teen brain can deeply condition itself to internet porn with surprising ease so that real sex eventually feels like an alien experience to some. One study, I don't even know how this study came to be, but it was done over in Italy among 14-year-old boys. They reported cases, I think it was under 20%, but more than 10% of this group reported cases of erectile dysfunction and just overall disinterest in sexual activity. 14-year-old boys are at the height of like smelly hormonal life, right? But they have been so oversaturated with pornography that they could no longer get erections and they were no longer interested in sex. That's 9th grade, 14 years old. The book Wired for Intimacy has this to say. It says, pornography teaches its students to focus on the physiology of sexual sensations and not the relationships for which those sensations were intended. It's all about the physical. So when we say, don't do the action, we're not taking into account and giving them any context that there's a lot more to this. And so they only see it as a physical action. The brain's reward center doesn't know what porn is. It only registers the level of stimulation through dopamine and opioid. So they're just going purely based off of what they feel, the sensations in their body. And those sensations are creating these addictive behaviors. And they're completely skewing what God has in mind for us. Sorry about that. With sex. Porn affects brain development, personality development, current and future relationships. It affects body image, and it destroys a child's innocence. Too many kids are being taught sex education by the internet. And then they come to Bible class, they go on retreats, they come to church, they do the thing, they seem to be a great kid, they meet someone, they love someone, they get married. At 8 a.m. before the wedding day, sex is bad, sex is wrong, because that's what we've told them. At 8 p.m. after we've had some cake and a ceremony, sex is good, be fruitful, multiply. That ain't how it works. That's not how it works at all. So we have crippled marriages before they even begin because we've never talked to them about the reality of what God has for us, what God has created for humanity. While at the same time, over and over and over again, for years, many of them have found themselves in this cycle of shame, in the cycle of making sex a commodity and making it all a consumer sport, as opposed to what God has defined for us. I've added some of this research in here recently because it just it blew my mind. If you're not familiar, OnlyFans is a platform that's been around since about 2016, but since 2020, it has really, really taken off. A lot of content creators on Instagram and YouTube have now added OnlyFans. There's a shocking number of elementary school or teachers, high school teachers, elementary school teachers that have gotten in trouble and lost their jobs because parents and students and administration find out they have an OnlyFans. OnlyFans is a platform for content creators at its baseline. So not too much unlike YouTube in a lot of ways, or Patreon, where in order for people to have access to your content, to your profile, they pay a monthly fee. That fee can be as little as $2 or $3 a month. And if you've got 300,000 subscribers at $2 or $3 a month, you make a pretty good living. A lot of teachers, when they get arrested, say, well, I was making $200,000 with OnlyFans, and I was making $35,000 teaching, so I had to do this to get income. That's some of the thinking out there. In January of 2024, OnlyFans.com saw approximately 1 billion monthly website visits. 1 billion visits in 1 month of this year. That's obscene. The NFL last year made $7.8 billion in revenue. OnlyFans came in second place with $6.6 billion with a B. That's more than the Major League Baseball and the NBA, which is similar to the MBS, only one typo away. And yes, they're right there next to each other. The NBA and MLB, $5 billion. More than $1.5 billion more dollars. That's crazy. And our country is obsessed with football, basketball, and baseball. We're pretty obsessed with sexual things as well. And not everybody on OnlyFans is sexual content, but most of them, and that is what they're known for. This was an interesting chart that I found just last night, actually, kind of looking and updating some of this. By gender, males far outweigh females as far as the creators and subscribers. 87% male, 10% female. By age group, you've got subscribers on OnlyFans, 18 to 24, represent 43% of their subscriber group. And 47% of the content creators are in that same age range. So from finishing high school to finishing college, that's the prime group. From 18 to 34, that's almost all of both the content creators as well as the subscribers. And if you look over there by country, the United States, I mean, we're lapping everybody. The second place is a conglomeration of all other countries outside of UK, Canada, Germany, Australia. But the United States, 45%. We've got a problem. There's another thing that I see with OnlyFans that's very scary. Going back to Grandpa's magazine, there's no actual connection there. There's no interaction with an image, with a picture of someone. You move to tube sites, there's some interaction. The person that's making the video, they can act like they're talking to you maybe. But when you go to OnlyFans, you have a direct connection with the person creating the content. And so a lot of these content creators will be interacting with people. They're in danger themselves. People will get psychosis and those kinds of things, but they also can then tailor make their content. They can create whatever they want based off of suggestions they get from their fans. So now this sexual, whatever we want to call it, the sexual brokenness is tailor-made to the consumer. And so there is an actual relationship being cultivated there that's extremely, extremely dangerous. This is a unique phenomenon that I don't think is going away anytime soon. We've talked about 1 Corinthians quite a bit. When the church doesn't talk about what's going on, particularly in the area of sex and sexuality, we don't do ourselves any favors and we don't give the next generation any hope. Do you not know that the unrighteous will not inherit the kingdom of God? Do not be deceived. Neither the sexually immoral, nor idolaters, adulterers, nor men who practice homosexuality, nor thieves, nor the greedy, nor drunkards, nor revilers, nor swindlers will inherit the kingdom of God. And such were some of you, but you were washed, you were sanctified, you were justified in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ. Now, concerning the matters, we put that off. As Christians, we've died to those practices. We've died to that heart condition. In chapter 7, Paul writes, now concerning the matters about which you wrote, it is good for a man not to have sexual relations with a woman, not because of the temptation to sexual immorality, but because of the temptation to sexual immorality, each man should have his own wife, each woman her own husband. The husband should give to his wife her conjugal rights, and likewise the wife to her husband. For the wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. Likewise, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. Do not deprive one another, except perhaps by agreement for a limited time, that you may devote yourselves to prayer. But then come together again, so that Satan may not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. This is a single guy, a bachelor, writing this. He gets it. He understands the deep draw of sexual temptation. But did you also catch what God's purpose for sex is? I'll read it again. The husband should give to his wife her conjugal rights, and likewise the wife to her husband. For the wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. Likewise, the husband does not have authority over his own wife, but the wife does. Sex is not about my pleasure. It's about giving of myself to my wife, and vice versa. Satan has so craftily and so effectively made sex a consumer activity. It's about my pleasure. God says, absolutely not. It is about you giving of yourself. And I gave a similar talk to some college students a while back, and I said, hey guys, I'm going to let you know a little secret. If you want like a really good sex life, then whenever you're intimate with your spouse, if you're trying to please them and they're trying to please you, that's the secret. Whenever you become the consumer, then that's when things start to go off the rails. But we have such a skewed, earthly, fractured, broken view of this that never even comes into question. This is the holiness side of it. God never said that we are to be consumers of anything of this world. We are stewards of what he has given to us. And in this context, marriages will be strengthened. It's meant to design result in a very strong, resilient bond. If I put that piece of tape on here and every day I apply pressure to that piece of tape, it gets more and more difficult to remove that tape. You want a strong, resilient marriage? Have a strong, healthy sex life. Give of yourself, and your spouse gives of themselves. We've missed that. That was not in the teaching that I heard growing up. And I'm not just here to criticize the way I was raised. I just don't think that we thought about it in the church. I just don't think we think about it that way in the church. Because when we focus on the action, we do what the Pharisees did. They focused on the outward side, right? Jesus said it's the heart, the intention of the heart. There's nothing more Christ-like than giving of yourself. So when we allow these natural God-given urges, this reward circuitry in our brains, the hormones that are released, the chemical reactions in our brains, when we allow that to be hijacked by the world, then we give very little hope for people to overcome that, because it's all they've ever known, and it maps very, very deeply in your brain. And we're going to get in our next session, we're going to talk about how to kind of give a visual of that. You think of walking through the woods. The first time you walk through the woods, there's no trail. But if you walk that same path every day, that trail becomes more and more defined. That's the way our brain works. That's the way our brain neuroplasticity works. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the singer Billie Eilish. She's one of the most popular entertainers on the planet these days. This is from an interview she had, ironically, with Howard Stern on the Howard Stern show. She said, "I think porn is a disgrace." And I used to watch a lot of it, to be honest. I started watching porn when I was like 11. That's 6th grade, by the way. I thought that's how you learn how to have sex. I was watching abusive porn, to be honest, when I was like 14, again, 9th grade. And I thought I was one of the guys and would talk about it, and I think I was really cool for not having a problem with it and not seeing why it was bad. I didn't think it was that big of a deal, basically. I think it really destroyed my brain. I think that I had like sleep paralysis and these like almost night terrors just because I would watch abusive BDSM. That's very violent, like strangulation and that kind of stuff, sex acts. I couldn't watch anything else unless it was violent. I didn't think it was attractive, and I was a virgin. It led to problems where first few times I had sex, I was not saying no to things that were not good, and it's because I thought that's what I was supposed to be attracted to. I'm so angry that porn is so loved. This is not someone in a Bible class talking about the spiritual side of holiness of sex. This is one of the most popular entertainers on the planet, talking to a man who is known for talking openly about really sexual things on the radio, the original shock jock. And here she says, it's awful. I did horrible things and was put in terrible situations because I was led to believe that this is the way it's supposed to be. We have got to be much louder and much more effective and much more articulate in how we teach about sex. Because now our kids have access to everyone's definition of what it's supposed to be. And now our college students have that same access. And now our married couples have access to those things. There are people that will tell you out there that couples need to watch porn together to help their sex life, all these things. There's one podcast, it started talking about God stuff. I don't know how we got here, but they were talking AI and technology. And there's a philosophy out there that goes back to St. Augustine, that says, in his writings and confessions, he said the brothels are beneficial to society because that's where the sexually broken go to act out all their fantasies, and it keeps them basically out of the general population. And so the thinking is, well, we should have sex robots today and give those to the sexually broken people so they can act out their sexual fantasies and get them away from the general population. It's using brokenness to try to fix brokenness. And we're here. We're in the age of the sex robot, AI and VR and all of that. Like it's our experiences are becoming more immersive. Our artificial experiences are becoming more immersive. And from a brain standpoint, that's a very dangerous thing. Because the goal of virtual reality and gaming, all of that, the better it is the more realistic it is, right? You want to be able to actually go into combat zone and take people out as a sniper without actually having to be in a combat zone with the risk of death. Well, now we're doing that sexually. We want to be able to act out all these fantasies without the risk of whatever. Well, now we can start to do that because of technology. We have to steward our bodies, and we have to cultivate holiness. And then we have to teach the next generation how to do that. So if you think one conversation about what is sex and you're explaining the physiology of it, you think that's going to get it, you're mistaken. And if that's what was given to you for then you to figure it out, don't repeat the process. Break that cycle. Let's make sure those numbers always go up. And instead of going up incrementally 1 or 2%, let's get those up there closer to that triple digits. That's where we have to start. Ephesians 2 says, you were dead in your trespasses and sins in which you once walked, following the course of this world, following the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that is now at work in the sons of disobedience, among whom we all once lived in the passions of our flesh, carrying out the desires of our body and the mind, and were by nature children of wrath like the rest of mankind. We're not that anymore. We cannot allow technology to cultivate that in our hearts over and over again. We've died to those things. We've died to self. I go back to what Jesus said. Pornography is not the heart of the issue. Lust is an issue of the heart. The issue here is our heart and what we cultivate in there. And unfortunately, technology really amplifies what we cultivate. It takes the things that we look at, the things that we listen to, the things that we watch. It shapes and molds our heart. Again, going back to 1 Corinthians 6:18, glorify God in your body. Flee from sexual immorality. I really think that the tape analogy is a better way to initiate this conversation. If you have found yourself, and we call it now purity culture, particularly in the mid to late 90s, early 2000s, where every youth rally reminded you girls that it's all your fault. That is a lie. It is not all your fault. And guys, if we ever thought that we got off scot-free, that's not the case either. And I'm not looking here to place blame anywhere. I'm looking here to say we got to do better. We got to make sure that what we teach is actually what the Bible teaches. Because sometimes we miss the mark there in how we teach it. I think the intent was right. Don't have sex before you get married. But we didn't always answer the why. And if you've had kids, you know why it's going to come. But why? But why? But why? Because God said so. That's our final one there. But with this conversation, it's got to be more. We got to know the why. And I think maybe that's part of the challenge. I don't think that our parents or our grandparents talked about this stuff very much either. There is some value to what Oprah has done in the culture of allowing us to talk freely about some things. If we think that there's this list of taboo topics in the church that we can't talk about, then we're saying, Satan, you got it, man, you win. Not even giving a chance. We have a young man that grew up at Madison, went through his time there when I was a youth minister, and we had a great relationship. And then went to college and found a community that embraced same-sex lifestyles. And at some point he told his mom, there was nobody here that I could talk to. And that has haunted me and grieved me because it's wrong, it's a lie. But from his perspective, the guy that in his senior class that struggled with heterosexual pornography addiction could find accountability and encouragement. And he can confess that and he could be accepted and encouraged. But he, as a guy that struggled with same-sex attraction and same-sex pornography, couldn't talk to anybody about it because there's a different level of shame and hatred and vitriol because we always lead with it's an abomination. There's probably some truth there with regards to the culture that we create. I go back to one of the things we said last night. If we don't accurately identify sin, particularly through the confessing of sin, and then reconciling ourselves with God and with one another, then the next generation thinks that if they struggle with sin, well, we don't talk about that. We don't talk about Bruno like that, right? We don't do that here. This is exactly where we do that, in our homes and in our churches. Of all of the research I've done, I've come to be more passionate about this topic than any other because I think we have not been successful. And it never fails. Every single time I talk about this, there's always someone that comes up after and said, the purity culture got me. That I've felt that for years. There's always someone that comes up and says, I know someone or I am someone that has struggled with porn addiction and I just cannot find freedom from it. I spoke at Beltline in Decatur, and there's a group of guys that go there on Wednesday nights from Project Rescue, which is an addiction recovery ministry in our area. When you look at the brain scans of people that are addicted to pornography, they're eerily similar to those that are addicted to gaming as well as opioids. Because the brain's doing the same thing. It's playing that game of that dopamine game. There's a good book. I've got it on the list. I have an Amazon list at the end of the next session that I'll share with you. The Molecule of More. It's become, Huberman Labs and others have talked about dopamine a lot in the last couple of years. It's become more prominent to talk about. But man, it is so powerful. And not only these platforms, but Satan knows how to manipulate what is God-given. And that's the thing of just focusing on the action. That when we said don't have sex before marriage, somewhere along the way that turned into sex is bad. And again, before your wedding day, sex is bad, but right after you get married, now sex is good. Like you don't flip that switch like that. It doesn't just change. Sex is not bad. In fact, it is the most precious thing, and that is why we have to teach accurately. We have to have conversations so we understand what they're understanding, and we can help them learn how to think as Christ. Any questions or comments? It's not usually after this one. I usually try to have more jokes too. Yes, sir. Okay. Yes. Yeah, a little bit. Just going to re-emphasize this, that it's more than the act. We don't need to just sit on the act of it there and harp on that, but the relationship part. There are a couple of websites that I have found some really good resources. That book, YourBrainOnPorn.com, is really eye-opening, and I would encourage everyone to read that to understand what goes on. Gary Wilson doesn't write. He's an academic, but he doesn't write at a level that I can't understand. So if I can understand it, I think everybody can. But what was helpful to me there was to understand how the brain works, and then counseling people with, when you are addicted to pornography, this is what's going on inside your body. And that, just the shame kind of goes away when they understand, oh, so this, I mean, I used to think a chemical addiction was someone was addicted to a physical chemical, right? But it's the chemical reactions in your brain that they're talking about with an addiction. So a porn addiction is very similar to opioid addiction. It's not just, most people can't just quit cold turkey because they have trained their brain to think this way. So you now have to retrain your brain to think differently. And that's part of what I think Scripture points to when it says you've died to this old way of thinking, this old way of living. So yourbrainonporn.com, he also has some resources there. Fight the New Drug. You guys familiar with Terry Crews? He's a big, muscly guy. You've probably seen him on Old Spice commercials, half man, half horse. But he's also a comedian and actor. Well, I think it was 2020 actually, or 2019, somewhere in there. He posted a video on his social accounts, sitting in his car crying, basically talking about his porn addiction and how it had wrecked his marriage and wrecked his family. He became the main spokesman for fightthenewdrug.org, which is an online resource. They have podcasts that are very helpful. They have some other kits on how, like a family kit, a teen kit, that kind of thing, of how to, some ways you can start addressing the addiction. I do think for some of this, just like someone that's an alcoholic or someone that's addicted to opioids, there's a place for professional counseling as well to help with some of the triggers. Oftentimes, I think pornography becomes the coping mechanism. So when you feel like you're not in control of something, pornography gives you this false sense of control because you can control the content, or especially when it also involves self-pleasure, masturbation, then there's a lot of psychological stuff there that gets entangled in all of this. That's no longer a giving of self, which is the way it was designed. That is, you are the master and commander here. You are the one that gets to define the content. You're the one that gets to define pleasure and be in control. Well, that's not how it works. Usually in pornography, you probably don't see like that time of the month or headaches or kids. Like there's not, real life things in a marriage that impact sexual intimacy. Those aren't portrayed. It's the highlights reel and it's the fantasies and stuff in pornography. So what has now trained the brain is something that is so unrealistic that you have to pull back to what is reality and what is quote unquote normal. So there's a really big psychological level to a true porn addiction. The same way there's a psychological level to opioid and alcohol. So these are the first places I would start. And if you're talking about someone that you know, or a child of yours or a friend of yours, I would read the book. It's a very short book, Your Brain on Porn, and start there. If they're struggling with it, then Fight the New Drug. I'm trying to remember the name of the podcast. It's on their website, but they have actually interviewed a lot of folks, especially girls that have been a part of human trafficking. And a lot of times, I actually have a friend, a neighbor in my neighborhood. He works for the Secret Service, and it's a secret. Don't tell anybody. But he just last year they had a big bust where they were able to retrieve a 14-year-old boy back. He had been groomed online by a 35-year-old man. And where we live, there's a particular part of our community that is known as a corridor. We live here. North of us is Nashville. East of us is Atlanta. South of us is Birmingham. So we're a big hub for trafficking. And he said, it was great. It was a really good thing to celebrate. We don't always get to celebrate these things. But this podcast, they have a lot of interviews with girls that thought they were going to a modeling appointment, and they ended up being drugged, they ended up being recorded, or they were coerced in other ways. And one of the interviews that I was listening to, the girl talked about how I got it off of Pornhub. It's considered one of the biggest platforms. I got it off of Pornhub, which is a big deal. But then I realized 3 or 4 months later, I kept popping up. My friends would find me in Google searches and stuff. And now I'm on 17 other sites I never knew existed. Because when you go to these sites, just like YouTube, you can download a video. And once you download the video, it can go anywhere. So it is a lifetime of whack-a-mole. It's just constant. So when you hear people that share those stories, most people that are addicted to porn don't feel like they're participating in human trafficking. But when you hear their stories of how the reason we have unlimited content and unlimited infinite scroll is because there's an unlimited number of people that participate in this world. And most of them are not there on their own accord. There are some powerful people that manipulate. So when you hear that story, I think sometimes that has been impactful. The folks that I've been counseling, like, okay, well, I never realized I was actually really complicit in human trafficking. That's different. Like I see that different. That shifted their mindset a little bit. So some of this is about shifting your perspective, because it's kind of advertised as a victimless crime, or not even a crime, right? Actually, there was an interview talking about OnlyFans that a counselor was talking about when she was counseling some girls with it. They don't see it as pornography, and that's part of the challenge. We talked about that, how lustful content, in especially younger kids' mind, is not the same as porn. Well, I'm not watching porn, but you're watching people take their clothes off and dance around in their underwear, and like it's cultivating lust. So I think our teaching has to go to the lust part of it. Sorry, I went all around your answer. Does that give you any help at all? Are you looking for more? Yeah, check with those. And like I said, do you guys have counselors here at all? Or I mean, that may be a place to start. Just say, what are some other resources? We have a couple of counselors that are associated with Madison particularly with our younger folks. I need to build up that resource of books as well. I need to get with it. I should already have had that for you, and I apologize. I'll find that and send that to Landon as well. But she, one of our counselors in particular, had started doing more counseling in sexual addictions, and so she does have some books that she has recommended in the past. And I don't think I have that list right now, but I will get that for you. Yes, sir. The other thing is accountability. As much as you can, especially if it's a teenager or someone in your home, you need access to their phone. Check their phones. If you see an OnlyFans app on there, you got to get rid of it. Check their web browser history, those kinds of things. While they're still in our homes, we have authority and we have the right and really the responsibility to check those things. There's incremental liberty given to them as they show a pattern of wisdom. And that's the way I think we need to be talking about it from a very, very early age. So it's not a surprise when they turn 17, we say, well, you're not wise, just out of the blue, right? They need to be hearing this all along. When they get to that point, they don't see all of this stuff. I would show it to them. I would show them the research. Give them a book, that book, Your Brain on Porn, and say, read this. I'm going to read it as well. And then afterwards, we're going to talk about it. And I want you to tell me how you view pornography now. Did this change anything? I think us collaborating on some of these things are helpful, because as we learn as parents, we need to share that learning with our kids as well. If you are mentoring college students in particular, they're usually a lot more apt to talk about these things. They're definitely talking about it with their friends, but they're apt to talk about it sometimes not with parents, but with a friend or a mentor. So if you're not a parent of a kid here, you can be someone's mentor, and they may open up to you the same access a youth minister has, a little bit more than a parent sometimes. Well, mentors that aren't the youth minister and aren't their parents, that don't have a responsibility, they're not paid to love them and to be in their life, they just do it on their own. Kids see authenticity there, and they'll open up to that. So that's another approach. Would you add anything to that, and with some of the experiences you've had or what you've seen in teenagers?
No, I don't think so. Giving them really the knowledge of why it's harmful. I think we do an okay job as a church explaining it spiritually. And for a lot of young people, in my experience, the spiritual gravity of the situation is slow to catch up.
Right.
And so training them about the societal issues around it, and then the personal problems that can be there as well. Whatever issue they resonate with the most at the time, as long as they find something to give them practical motivation to fight against it, until the spiritual gravity of the situation really catches up in the maturity.
Yeah. I've not met many teenagers in particular that even know the word oxytocin or vasopressin. I think part of this is us being more educated on our bodies as adults. I didn't know that stuff. Nobody told me. That's not what we covered in anatomy class in high school. But they did show us how to use a condom in class. So, that's kind of weird, right? But that's what we do. We don't really get to the heart of things a lot of times. We address symptoms. And so I think if we are more open with them about some of those things, I think they'll respond pretty well to that. When you understand what's going on in your body and why these things are so harmful, that's science and scripture. You can't really argue with either of those, right? When science really points to scripture, it's kind of, okay, there you go. So even the scientists agree with this, and they don't even like God. So there's got to be a lot of truth here when you start to frame it in that context, and then when you show that scripture really speaks to these things that's relevant, I think that's more powerful. And it also doesn't create a cloak of shame on an entire generation. when they get in this cycle of addiction, it is their fault and it's not their fault to some degree, right? That allows them to breathe a little bit and allows them to come to these places where we gather to worship and to come before God and say, we are broken and we come to you to be complete, to be whole. And I think if we get a little bit better at articulating that and living that out, I think we'll have a little bit more success. Any other thoughts or questions? Great way to start off a Saturday morning. If I didn't give you the full appetizer yesterday, because it'd just be me and Landon talking about these things. We got one more session here, and we're going to talk about how to cultivate some of these conversations and how to approach some of these topics about technology. Let's take a few-minute break, and then we'll come back for that.